Bourbonese Qualk, Bourbonese Qualk, Bourbonese Qualk, Bourbonese Qualk.
Good evening, everyone. You are listening to Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire. Tonight, we are happy to have Simon Krabs on the phone, leader of Bourbonese Qualk, very influential and quite well-known bands coming from the UK, formed in 1979 with his brother Ted at the time. The band were mostly hunting experimental side of the music, even if it's quite linked to the industrial scene. He will express and tell us more right now as we have him on the phone. We will have lots of questions to ask him about his projects and many of his different projects. So we're going to start with the first question. Could you tell us the very beginning of Bourbonese Qualk? How did the whole story with your brother start back in '79?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I grew up in a provincial part of the UK in the northwest England, in a fairly boring kind of place, like most people do. And I think we just started messing around with tape recorders and whatever instruments were lying around, just because it was a kind of revolt against a teenage revolt against the kind of tedium of provincial life, you know.
You were in Southport, right?
Yeah, which is a kind of suburb of Liverpool, which is northwest England. Yeah. But there's nothing particularly interesting about it. And I suppose most people, when they're teenagers, you got to rebel a bit, and that was our rebellion. Was kind of doing abstract noise and kind of surrealistic cut-ups and stuff. That's how it kind of started. And I suppose it's sort of a rebellion against the sort of boring music that was around, a lot of kind of rock music and really cheesy 80s pop music. So that's how it started, and we just kept on going. It didn't stop.
How old were you at this moment?
Young, like 15, something like that. Maybe younger. But most people stop, I suppose, after a few months or a few years, but we didn't. We just kept on going, and I'm still doing it.
So from the start, you had the idea of experimenting around sound, or you had already an idea of what you wanted to do?
No, not really. No, I mean, we didn't really have an objective. I mean, it was really just sort of playing around with sound, and the kind of fascination with sound, how you can manipulate it. I mean, we had zero equipment. We had an old tape recorder that used to belong to my grandfather, and like a broken acoustic guitar or something, and just messed around, and I kind of built a little noise generator from an old bits of kind of circuit boards and stuff like that. No idea what I was doing, but it made noise, so that's what we did. But it just seemed natural to do something that was experimental. I mean, I think also we couldn't really play anything, and we couldn't really, because we didn't have any equipment, we couldn't form a band or do real music. That just wasn't possible.
But did you have any influence at this time, bands or?
Yeah, but I think too wide to be relevant. I think I mean, we didn't sort of sit down and think, oh, let's do something like, I don't know, a band. we didn't do that. I think what we were doing was kind of disconnected from what we were listening to.
Yeah.
So I don't think there really was an influence like that. I mean, there must have been, really, because some of it sounds a bit like something else. So there must have been some influence there. But most of it was dictated by just playing around and the lack of equipment. So it was, we didn't think of it as being a career or anything that anybody else would want to listen to. It was entirely just for ourselves.
And you were in an art school at this time, or maybe later, no?
I left Southport and went to an art school called the Slade, which is quite a famous art school in London. So I moved to London when I was about 17, 18, and escaped Liverpool and carried on what I was doing with sound.
Is that the period where you went directly to squats?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, London in the early 80s was a very, very different place. I mean, it was empty buildings all over the centre of London. And it just seemed ridiculous to me that you have to pay rent when there's all this kind of empty property around. So, yeah, pretty quickly I just started squatting and got into the whole squatting movement there, which ended up being the ambulance station in the southeast of London.
Can you describe it? Because for us it's like a legend, something surreal and exciting.
It was. I mean, well, it was a big building, so it was about, let's see, 6 stories high. But it was an old building, maybe 100 years old. It used to be for ambulances, for hospitals and stuff. But it had been derelict for maybe 30 years. And it was originally squatted by a bunch of French anarchists, believe it or not. But they were having trouble with the local skinheads, getting into fights, the local skinheads, and I think they were getting sick of it. So I knew them by then, and they said, would you be interested in taking it over? And I said, yeah. So we took over the building and ended up fighting with the local skinheads. Yeah, it was a great place. I think there was about a 2-year period where it really kind of flowered, but then went quickly downhill.
That was in 82, right?
No, this is a bit later. So it would have been 84 to 86 was the kind of the best period of it. But it was a collection of whole ranges of different people. So there was artists, sculptors, printers, musicians. And we had studios, print workshops. We had a place for melting bronze, for making statues and stuff.
Yeah. And
we had screen printing places, block printing. We had kind of like an office, and cafes, and like a big space downstairs where we put bands on.
It was an open art space.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of what became known as a social centre, And I suppose we sort of based it on models of like what we'd seen in Italy and Holland as kind of autonomous social centres. So there was no funding. No one had any money. There's no money involved. And we put 3 bands on from Thursday to Friday to Saturday. So what's that? That's 9 bands a week.
Wow.
for 2 or 3 years. So there's a lot of stuff going on all the time. And it became well known as a music venue. So kind of pretty much any of those bands of that period would have played there.
Yeah, which bands, for instance?
Pulp. Pulp played there. Oasis, Jesus Mary Chain.
Yeah.
A lot of punk bands. Crass, Crisis, Conflict, Flux of Pink Indians. All the kind of crass bands played there, and all sorts. Pretty much everyone.
And that's the time where you did you decide right away at the beginning to make your own DI label, the famous Recloose organization? How do you came on the idea?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually earlier. I had started the label when I was in Liverpool, so we'd released a compilation album there. But the idea of Recloose was to be a cooperative label that was owned by the people on the label, by the musicians on the label. It wasn't to be particularly a kind of commercial label. But as it turned out, most artists are not really involved in promoting other artists or supporting other artists. They're just interested in their own work, And that's kind of what happened. It became more of a label than a cooperative. Bourbonese Qualk became the main artist on that label because we sold more records than anybody else. That was based in the ambulance station, and the studio was in the ambulance station.
And the crazy story that I discovered a few months ago was that you released also AG/Graph, which is the pre-Muslim Goes production.
Yeah, I mean, I knew Bryn, again, back when I was in Liverpool, because he was in Manchester, which is nearby. And yeah, I kind of tried to get him to record stuff and try to promote his stuff. So yeah, I released like a 7-inch EP and then an album. But he was quite a difficult character, so it didn't go very far.
It seems you have to be in a very active period and lots of energy coming at the time, all over.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I and we, which is, Bourbonese Qualk and our immediate circle, were very involved in the politics of the time. So the kind of anarchist, autonomous politics. So we were very active in that, and also in housing, like kind of squatting. At one point, we housed more people than the local council, which is a lot. It's a big number. And it was basically like a kind of mutual aid system. So we opened up empty properties that were kind of under the specification, under the quality specification for the local council to use. But we would have people that we'd housed who were plumbers or electricians or builders or plasterers, and we'd get them to go around and fix it up for free. And then someone would move in. And basically the system worked like that, is that everybody helped each other in a kind of mutual aid system. And it worked really well until the local politics got too heavy with us, as it usually does,
Did we send the police or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, we were involved in a big occupation of and then defence of a housing estate in southeast London, which went on for about 6 months of battles and, petrol bombs and fighting with police. But that was, it was a bit like that.
So you had your autonomous community, you had your studio, and then the band could produce records and do live things. So you had tremendous freedom.
Yes, but it kind of comes with a price, I think. Everything we did was at zero cost. We never had any money. I mean, and the equipment was incredibly simple, very, very basic. But yeah, we were completely independent. But I think you also become a bit isolated, perhaps, with what the main current of music or culture is. And I think there's a danger that you could perhaps become a bit self-indulgent or kind of stuck in a way of thinking, which I'm not sure if we did, but I think that is possible to have. But yeah, we continued along that route, and we slowly, got better equipment. We had buses for touring around in, and it got slowly better and better. But it was hard work, and it certainly wasn't a career. There was no kind of reward from it. It was pretty difficult.
Were there at that time contacts with all the experimental and industrial scene?
Yeah, so we used to tour. We toured around Europe a lot. So maybe twice every year for a couple of months. So, maybe a quarter of the year we'd be touring around the different parts of Europe. By doing that, we built a very effective kind of network of politically and also musically, a kind of network of the various centres around Europe, but also kind of music scene as well. So yeah, I think one of the benefits was that we could develop our own network rather than rely on a music industry network or a kind of cultural network.
Like, for example, the contact you had with Club Moral in Belgium.
Yeah, that's one. Also in Netherlands was a thing called the V2, the V2 in Den Bosch, and NL Centrum, and various other people, but also in Berlin and France as well. There used to be a place called Usine Palikau in in Paris.
Yeah. Sorry, yes.
I think burnt down or was demolished or something. But there's various places in Paris as well. So there was a quite a strong network of like-minded people.
Slowly you evolved as your music with the new materials you could get at the time. Is it the way it happened with the Bourbonese Qualk? Because your instruments started to evolve. You had the gamelan, you had also a bit later more electronic, but not very synthy for what I have seen or read.
You mean technologically evolved, or?
Yeah, because I've wrote an article where you, at the time, you were not into the whole analog synthy stuff.
No, not really. I mean, it was kind of beyond our capabilities anyway, financial capabilities. So we relied on a lot of kind of self-made stuff or manipulating sounds, which I think, in the long term was good because it had a more unique organic flavour to it. But I was not particularly interested in sort of electronics for the sake of it, the kind of electronic aesthetic. I was much more interested in kind of analog electronics, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I think when sampling came along and was affordable, then that made quite a difference, because you could manipulate sampled sounds and chop them up and granulate them, and all the rest of it, which was, I think, was much more interesting than the kind of what was a quite limited manipulation of analog synthesizers.
And you sampled a lot. Some of your early songs are cascades of samples. How did you work? How did you proceed?
Well, first of all, we borrowed from my friend Nigel from the Nocturnal Emissions what's called a green gate system, which is basically a circuit board plugged into a very cheap computer, and it's like a 8-bit sampler. So we used that a lot, but it was very limited. And then eventually we bought a Mirage, which was an Ensoniq sampler, which was like the cheapest one around. But it could do a lot with it, and it had kind of nice filters, and sort of you could really mess it up to get some sort of very noisy sounds out of it, and basically use that for a long, long time.
And where does the idea of using all this instrument coming from Asia or India, all this drumming parts?
I think it's just a curiosity with music and sound. I mean, I always felt that, especially kind of pop music or rock music, was very limited in its sound. I really hate rock music. I think it's kind of been growing up in the provincial town where you just that's the only option you have is like AC/DC or I don't know Pink Floyd or whatever. It's really limited, and so it just seemed obvious to sort of look elsewhere for different sounds. And I'd become interested in Arabic music just through the radio in London. There was an Arabic radio station. I just started recording stuff off that and listening to it. We went to Morocco and bought some instruments in Morocco. And I just got obsessed with Arabic music. And then I started playing in a gamelan orchestra, which is Indonesian percussion playing. I never really wanted it to influence the music, because it just sounds like kind of exoticism, It's just it's a bit stealing a bit of culture to make your music a bit more interesting. It's not really what I wanted to do. But I think maybe it's the non-tonal aspects of it which are more interesting. So like the kind of rhythmical sequences and abstraction and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, but that's the feeling when you listen to what you did in the 80s. It's that you had no boundaries, no limits.
Yeah, again, I think it comes from that. The kind of way we started playing was just exploring, and we didn't expect anyone to listen to it. And we just got into the habit of just doing that and not playing to a kind of an imagined audience. I think, also going back to Muslim Gauze, my problem with his later work was that he just incorporated bits of Arabic music into it without really understanding what it was musically. So it was just like a kind of spice he added to the sound to make it sound more interesting. There's a kind of, I don't know, cultural imperialism or something, which I think is very problematic.
Yeah, to be shut or locked in a type of sound. This is what you try to say.
Like in a formula.
Yes, it becomes very formulaic, but it's sort of he's reusing. Muslim Gauze was reusing kind of Western tropes about Arabic music, so repeating kind of stereotypical image of Arabic culture rather than exploring it or extending it or questioning it or something, So that was problematic as far as I could see.
We're gonna now make a small musical pause. We're gonna have Moving Forward, Shutdown and Soft City, and we're gonna continue the interview just after that. You are listening to Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire.
Give us a warning of when to stop.
You're listening to Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire, and we are on the phone with Simon Crabbe from Bourbonese Qualk.
How did you regard at the time the exploding of the industrial scene with bands like Throbbing Gristle and Nocturnal Emission and all those bands?
Well, Throbbing Gristle were much earlier. I mean, they kind of finished around about 82 or something like that. They were around and they had quite a big impact on the scene. But, I was never really that interested in industrial music. I was much more interested in kind of, sort of experimental sound and noise and stuff, which I think at the time industrial music was fairly narrow sort of characteristics of electronics, drum machines shouting, a bit of pornography thrown in there, but which I didn't think was particularly interesting. Nocturnal Emissions were really good friends. They were a bit older than us, so they were kind of like our mentors almost. They kind of looked after us in a way. And I still know Nigel really well. Again, they were kind of lumped into the industrial bag, but I think they had a much wider sonic landscape than most. It was a bit more kind of considered than most industrial bands, who tended to be there just to sort of adopt a style, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Way more open in every direction. I
think so, yeah. Yeah, so for me, the whole industrial thing was almost kind of over in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it kind of evolved into different, not very pleasant forms, like in America, it kind of ended up being kind of rock hybrid, with, I don't know, Skinny Puppy and all that lot.
Ministry, all those stuff.
Yeah, which was terrible.
Let's talk about the band. You were with Julian Gilbert and Steven Tenza from 82?
From up until about 1986, when that kind of iteration ended, and then I've basically formed a new version, if you like.
Yeah, because we can feel that in each album, it's a kind of reinvention of the project, the band. So each time you're trying to open a new door.
Yeah, I think it would have been very dull to have just stayed doing the same thing over and over and over again. But, like I say, we weren't trying to create a career in the music industry or perform to a specific audience. So it was possible to change all the time. And it was more interesting for us to change all the time. I think the records themselves, are the way they're edited and changed, it's never a continuous thing.
Even delved into this funk wave, as we may call it, like a certain ratio did on some of your songs. You can feel this.
Yeah, I think so. In the second iteration of Bourbonese Qualk, the drummer Owen, he was also the drummer of a band called the Stereo MCs.
Okay.
Which was a famous pop band. And if you play some of our stuff side by side, you'll see that Stereo MCs took the same rhythms that we had, but made them they kind of rapped over it, so made it into pop music. But there was a kind of connection there. Yeah, I think there was a sort of emerging dance scene in London in the kind of late 80s, which became acid house and the rest of it, which kind of, again, was always on the kind of pirate radio stations, and it was around a lot.
You had this interesting, I think maybe for many people it was the first time they discovered you, was with the album The Spike, that you decided to record, to produce with the German label Dossier. How does the whole story began? Because at the beginning you were totally against this kind of commercial business part. What made you change?
We were a record label and we made and sold records. So it was a commercial organization, if you like. We acted like a record label. We didn't give them away, obviously. So it was the model was the same. Basically, they contacted us, or contacted me, and asked if I could produce some of their bands that they were putting on at Atonel, to record and stuff, which I did. And then they wanted me to curate, to produce the Atonel Festival in Berlin, which is like a regular yearly festival of, experimental industrial music, which I did. So I went to Berlin and did that, which I think was the second Atonel Festival. And yeah, I just kind of met them and got involved in the whole Berlin scene, and it just seemed normal to release a record with them. So we did. I mean, in terms of commerciality, none of this stuff made lots of money. That's for sure.
But was it this album that brought you to a wider public?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the previous two albums, probably sold the same amount, and we got a lot of attention from those in the UK. I think maybe what it did is it widened our exposure in Germany and Europe in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because before Spike, you had Laughing Afternoon and Hope, right?
Yeah.
But you made some tapes before.
Yes, but they, tiny distribution, not.
Yeah, the first one was called We Want Peace. Is it your program?
No, actually, that's not true. That's information. I don't know where that came from at all.
Really?
No, that wasn't. That was definitely not our modus of working.
And so in 1986, you released Preparing for Power. It was another step for you. How was the album seen by your public at that time?
I mean, as far as I remember, it was kind of seen as being very bleak and austere.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I think people thought we were being very negative and overcritical. That we'd gone kind of a bit too extreme. But to me, it was just the same as all the other albums. I think that's fair. That's fair to say.
Is that because of the politics that was going on in England at that time?
Yeah, I think there was, in the kind of mid-'80s, there was a trend to not be critical, just to accept that, we were living in this kind of hyper-capitalist, liberal Thatcherite regime.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and that, to many people, that was great, because they made loads of money and they drove cars around and drank champagne and stuff, and then that was reflected in the culture of the time, the sort of Durans and what else, I can't remember, all that stuff.
Wow.
Was very dominant, and, a lot of people liked all that kind of fashion and, kind of glossy veneer.
Glamorous life.
So we were... obviously very much at odds with that, quite a contrast with that.
I just wanted to ask you about, because you sent me a link, very interesting link, that I shared with the team this week. It's probably also had influenced you in some way, but you sent me the link about the 120 years of electronic music, that you might have worked a lot on that massive...
Yes, it's amazing.
massive work.
Yeah, I mean, this first version I started of that was basically, it's always been a website, and that was in 1996, I guess. So I've been working on and off on it since then. So that's an ongoing project, and it's become very, very well known. It's used as a course textbook for a lot of universities. And
was it a research for you, or was it just because you wanted you loved to rediscover all those crazy instruments?
The way it came about it was. So you had. I started an internet agency very early on in the 90s. So we were doing websites and design and software and stuff in the early 90s, and it became obvious to me that the internet could be like a research tool, a kind of two-way research tool. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I became interested in was electronic music, obviously because of my history, but also because I started listening to early electronic music, so Messiaen, kind of Ons Martenot. So there are some instruments that are known, everyone knows, like the theremin and the Ons Martenot. But I thought, well, there must have been others. There must have been more going on at that time. So I started looking into it and researching and finding out all this history that no one knew about at the time. It was only unless you really, really wanted to dig into the archives and libraries. So I just started writing about that and compiling this timeline of electronic equipment.
Yeah, you go back to the 18th century with the clavecin électrique, the electrical cembalo. It's I didn't know it existed. It's a French invention from I don't remember his name, but which is in the National Library in France. But how did you discover or rediscover this thing?
Well, at the time I was living in Oxford, and I became a researcher at the library, the university library there, so I could get access to all sorts of magazines and books and chronicles that were quite hard to find in the pre-internet days. You had to spend a lot of time and effort digging this stuff up. And that's how I came across it, really. Yeah, I mean, you follow a thread and go back in time. So yeah, that's how.
I'm very curious about hearing this instrument. Did you? Is it working?
There is a reconstruction in a museum in Paris somewhere, but I don't think it works. I don't think it makes a sound.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but there's certainly no recordings of the original one because that was pre any kind of recording.
I suppose all that influences you in a way that your music changed also quite drastically. I mean, after Unpop, something changed completely, a new way of working, building music. Even the sound was also completely new. Did that all those research had an influence on you and the way you were regarding music and producing it also?
No, I don't think it did. I think what happened in that period was we were touring a lot, so performing a lot, and we had 2 big buses and loads of equipment and computers, and so by that we kind of gradually accumulated all of this equipment, and the whole kind of tour team was about 11 people.
Wow!
And again, tour like at least 2 times a year. And I was basically writing all the music, recording everything. I was the vocalist and the performer. I used to fix the bus, fix the bus engines when they broke down. I'd organise all the tours, all this. So basically I was doing like hundreds of different jobs. I think at that period it became obvious that sort of being bands and performing like that was quite old-fashioned, because this was the time of raves and techno and all the rest of it, and being in a band seemed a bit anachronistic. So I just decided to stop and narrow it all down to just like computers and portable equipment, and get rid of all of this stuff that had accumulated. It just seemed out of time. It didn't seem to be that important anymore, and it was really hard work. It was actually really hard work for not much effect. So I thought, right, we'll just stop it and change it again, do something else. So I think it was a consequence of that rather than research or whatever.
We're going to have the third musical part right now. We're going to play Murmur, No Easy Answers, and Shutdown. You are listening to Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire. We have today Simon Krabs from Bourbonese Qualk.
You're listening to Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire, and we're on the phone with Simon Crabbe from Bourbonese Qualk.
So we were at the period of the big change in your music with the album Autonomia that came out in '93 on Praxis Record. So did they contact you at the time for that release? How did that happen?
Okay. Praxis is basically Christoph Klanggalerie. He was kind of one of our network of friends and helpers in Switzerland, in Basel in Switzerland. So I'd known him before as a kind of concert organizer and so on. But he moved to England and started Praxis as a kind of noisy techno label, and it still exists.
Yes.
I don't know if you'd want it to be described as a techno label, but I think that's what it was. And he was involved in the local. He came and lived in the local area because he knew us, and we started doing records. So yeah.
So this is the part where you were going more deeply into electronics. There is a live album that came the year after, in '94, Feeding the Hungry Ghost. Where was that one recorded?
It was all live recordings from around Europe, but I think particularly Eastern Europe. So we were very involved in the kind of underground scene in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, a little bit in Romania. So we travelled, before the wall came down, we illegally travelled in Eastern Europe and very much involved in the kind of anti-state politics there and the underground scene in general. So I think quite a few of those recordings were from that period. So that was up until '89, maybe a bit after as well. We went back afterwards, after the wall came down.
And then you had a quite long pause between that live album and like a comeback in 2001. For what I have read on the web, it seems to be the period where you became a father. Did that had an impact on your music?
Yeah, I think it did. I started a technology company as a job, which was in Oxford in the UK. So I was involved in computers and technology and internet and so on quite early on. And I think that distracted from it. I was still doing music, but I wasn't particularly interested in letting anyone hear it, which seemed to be a normal thing to do. I didn't particularly want to perform or release stuff. So yeah, there was quite a gap, yeah.
So I'm supposing that you had lots of tracks that never came out from that period.
Oh yeah, lots.
And so, was it hard to choose what to do for the album on Uncertainty?
No, because that was current work. I was working with Miles, who's the guitarist, but in a much more kind of technological way. I'd written my own software for kind of granular synthesis and sound manipulation. So there wasn't old recordings that had been released.
And you were going with that album more deeper into very, I don't want to say hype, but something very that we could relate it to warp. Because it's very, I don't like the term IDM, but...
the warp label.
Warp, yeah.
I don't know. I've never heard that stuff. I can't really compare.
So it's a drastic change again, huh?
Yeah, but that's part of the plan, isn't it? It was never going to be just the same stuff over and over again. The whole point was to. I think we also quite enjoyed annoying the audience, because people buy stuff and they expect it to be the same, that it's the same stuff they like over and over and over again. But what we enjoyed is doing something completely different that they probably didn't like, so it disrupted their what they're expecting. So that's why, really, I think it's the challenge and maybe annoy people a bit.
Yeah, what's your vision of the musical industry today? It seems rather bleak and stereotyped.
I think it always was a bit bleak. If you look at music in the 70s, it was very manipulated, and music in the 80s was very manipulated. It was very much an industry which was there to make money, and I don't think it's any different today. I think it's harder to identify as a single industry because it's much more granular. And obviously, there's stuff like Spotify where people just don't get paid, so it's kind of a legalized theft. But then that existed before. So it's a new, evolved form of capitalism, but it's the same game.
Would you say that it's a kind of new modern slavery?
Well, as much as capitalism is slavery, yeah, why not? I don't know if the music industry particularly is the best example. I mean, here in the UK, I think we have a much more kind of neoliberal system. Mm-hmm. So ways of employment have been very deregulated. So you just get paid by the hour or the half hour or the minute, Mm-hmm. So that's a much more insidious type of wage slavery, if you like. And wages have always gone down, whereas the wealthy obviously increases.
Mm-hmm. What is your thought about all those platforms, this digital, dematerialized music?
I mean, obviously the mechanism is good. It's a very efficient way of distributing music and getting people to listen to it. But the problem is who owns it. I mean, obviously it should be owned by the musicians themselves, so it should be nationalized, if you like. It's not as a nation. How would you call that? Musicalized. And whoever creates the content should own the value that is made from that, so whether or not it's the data or it's a financial aspect of it. So I think, the mechanism is fairly well evolved and efficient, but as with everything, it's in the wrong hands.
Spotify is probably the more caricatural of it all.
The problem is because they are continually searching for higher and higher profits, they subtly manipulate the type of music that works. So basically everyone has to follow the same trail to make money out of it. So you end up with this, I don't know if you heard the phrase Spotify core, it's a kind of type of music that sells best on Spotify. Mm. And basically all music is being pushed towards being like that. With the natural outcome is that music will be generated by artificial intelligence to supply what people search for and what drives the most clicks. So you will end up with a kind of AI-generated music purely in search of profit, which won't involve musicians at all.
It's already on the way.
Yeah,
but
that could be quite interesting as well. Who knows what that's going to come up with.
But you don't need musicians at all. You just take one song who was a hit and you reproduce it, or you change a bit and everything sounds the same. So
same formula.
Yeah. But just to be controversial, I think that not having musicians involved is probably a good thing.
Why?
I think musicians have had a negative impact on music over the the last century.
Because of their ego?
No, because they are more interested in reproducing a type of music through a certain type of skills. They can play an instrument, therefore that's what they do. But again, it kind of inhibits the development of music.
Do you think that this is one of the reasons why there is no real new musical movement appearing since 15 years almost?
I don't know if that's true. Maybe we're just too old, We just don't know. We just don't know about it. I mean, there's plenty of musical movements happening in the UK. Kind of grime scene and all this kind of stuff, but we don't recognise it as a scene because we're not involved in it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Or maybe it's happening in China or in North Africa or in Iraq. It's a much more global world. A global world, can you say?
So you think that internet has reduced these differences?
I think it's probably too early to tell. I think in the short term, it has. You can go to pretty much any country in the world and you'll hear a black metal band or a rap band or, whatever. But, how that's going to evolve is hard to tell. I think that what's interesting about culture and technology is that it evolves in unknown directions and has it picks up on unexpected consequences. So I think we will see something emerging from this that is not just a duplication of something that's existing. But again, I think if you go back 50 years, you'll see rock and roll bands in Indonesia. You'll see in Thailand, they're doing kind of pop music. But it's all kind of distorted by various kind of cultural filters and stuff. I think we will see something interesting.
I hope so. We're gonna have the first musical part. We're gonna play VAK from Unpub, Tonton Macoute from My Government Is My Soul, and Return to Order from Preparing for Power. You are listening to Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire with Simon Crabbe from Bourbonese Qualk.
Qualk.
Yeah, I'm French. Sorry, I'm French. I can't.
He can't pronounce Qualk.
I don't know why. It's so weird.
It's fine.
What
does it mean, Qualk? It's like a guy.
It doesn't mean anything, so that's fine,
That's why Bourbonese. It's like
but basically, in the early days, we used to change the name every week, and then we got bored of it, so we just kept the one we had that week, and that's what it was.
This is the last part of our phone interview with Simon Crabbe from Bourbonese Qualk on Tormentor Radio Show, Radio Libertaire.
So we're going to speak now about all your re-edition, because there are lots of stuff coming out lately. It has started, for what I have discovered, was Vynil-On-Demand in 2016. But I discovered that the year before you had a maxi was Mannequin record, and you told me that many things are coming again in the light lately. Mm-hmm. Can you give us more information of all those repressed albums?
If I can remember, yeah. So basically all of the old stuff is going to be it is being re-released on vinyl and CD and digital. And there have been various different formats of old archive material as well, which, to be honest, I don't understand. I don't get the idea of nostalgia with music. And I don't get the idea of collecting records. I don't have any records. I don't have any CDs. I don't have a record player. So it's a completely alien thing to me. But, people seem to like it. So there you go.
And how did it happen? Did Mannequin ask you? Did they contact you?
Yeah, they contacted us and said they'd be keen to do this re-release schedule. And, I think, like I say, there's a lot of kind of nostalgia about that, particularly that sort of era. I think when you look at something out of time, it has different values attached to it. What for us was an annoying kind of lack of equipment and lo-fi way of working now sounds kind of like it's very kind of considered and sort of structured that way. And it's quite hard to get that kind of sound because it's so easy to make things polished now, Mm-hmm. So I think there's a kind of interest in that era and that kind of dark wave sort of thing. Again, they're kind of trying to recompartmentalize it into a sort of history that wasn't really there, but then that's the way history goes, isn't it? I mean, can't complain about that.
It's like all this post-punk movement. I don't think at the time anyone called themselves post-punk. I don't know that.
No, at all.
I like it, but it's like you say, it's a compartment.
Yeah,
a label.
And the thing, once you start looking at any sorts of musics in detail, it turns out that there aren't any real movements. It's like, the people in Sex Pistols were also into reggae and pop music,
sure.
And rock bands as well. It just happened to be that the one that they were famous for was punk, became known as punk. And that's the same with everything, I think. So the idea that there are movements is not necessarily correct. Maybe manipulations is a better way of describing it.
Yeah. So we had all these re-editions, but I'm curious, is there any video testimony of your concerts and performances? Because it's mysterious.
No.
Not at all.
No, there aren't. Mostly because we couldn't afford video recorders because they were really expensive, and so no, there aren't. I did a lot of work with video, but kind of like video manipulation, so it'd be like video loops and stuff, but there's no copies of it anymore, and film as well.
You told me that you had new collaboration coming on the way very soon with two quite famous projects. Can you give us a bit more information on those two new collaborations?
Two new collaborations. I can tell you about one, which is me and Fritz Catlin. And Fritz is the drummer and one of the founder members of 23 Skidoo, which I'm sure most of you'll know of. So this collaboration goes under the name of Big Daddy. And Big Daddy is basically a famous wrestler was a famous wrestler here in the UK. But he was also my great uncle from the north of England.
Really?
So it's a kind of a joke, because I don't look like a wrestler.
You're more like a cultural wrestler, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
So for what I have heard, we are not going to play any of this tonight, because it's not out for the moment, but it's going, I will say, in the African side. It has more dubby side.
Yeah, it does. I mean, when I was a youth, I used to just listen to dub all the time. So that was what I listened to, back in the 80s, late 70s. I kind of listened to too much of it, so I couldn't actually listen to it anymore because I'd over-listened to it. But I think Fritz also has a similar sort of experience, So when we started working together, it just accidentally kind of came out as this sort of hybrid dub sound, which I think is, I think it works quite well because it's, a lot of people don't like it because it's such a sort of set genre, if you like. It's become very formalized. And it has a lot of kind of negative associations with it. So it's quite interesting to play with the idea of it. Again, it's to kind of annoy people a bit and to present something they're not quite expecting.
And do you have already an idea of the releasing date?
Well, I mean, at the moment there's a massive vinyl shortage, but the label says June this year.
June, very cool.
Yeah.
So are you planning to tour also with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got a few things lined up, which you'll hear about, no doubt.
Cool. It's very good news. I hope you're going to pass through Paris too.
Yeah, sure.
We hope so. Okay, so I think it's the end of the interview, except if you have something to say or something important. And
Is there any subject you want to add to that? No, I think we've covered most things. You don't want to bore the audience too much, do you?
Oh man, I don't think they're gonna be bored.
No.
Because we have more and more people, and I've had lots of questions about your project, because there seems to be a new generation discovering Bourbonese Qualk lately. So I think that it will work. Probably also your tour. I'm sure if you tour around, there will be some people to come and watch you.
That'd be good. It always helps to have an audience. More people to annoy.
Do you have already dates planned?
It's probably going to be around, most likely, kind of September period, the way things are going at the moment.
Okay, so thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you.
For everything and for your time, because
no problem.
It was quite long, and hope to get news from you very soon. Don't hesitate to send us whenever you have stuff. We will be delighted to play that on our show in the future.
I will do, yeah.
And we're gonna have very soon also your friend Nigel from Nocturnal Emission. So I think might be a kind of continuation about stuff, because Nigel told me that you had something together, started some project together as well.
Yeah, we're doing a collaborative. That's what you're talking about. Yeah, so we're doing a collaboration together, which we've been kind of talking about for years, but never got around to it. But yeah, I mean, there's not a particular rush to kind of get it finished, I don't think. But yeah, it's good. It's working out really well so far.
Very interesting. Well, yes. About that, we will pressure on Nigel to get more info.
You do that. Yeah.
So thank you very much again. Wish you a nice day.
Yes.
If it's not too rainy on your side.
It is. It's filthy, yeah. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome.
See ya.
Thank you, bye.
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 So the last musical section that we have to play is composed of 3 tracks. We will have Otaku, I don't know really how to pronounce that, coming from Autonomia. The album came out in 93 on Praxis Records. Then we have Temporal, on the album On Uncertainty, label Corn Plastic in 2001. And the last track that we kept expressly for the end is a remix of Lies by Ancient Methods that came out in 2015 on Mannequin Records. We wish you a nice night on Tormentor Radio Show. See you in 2 weeks.
Listen, all you boards, government, syndicates,